Greetings, students. Today we're going to begin looking at the second part of our West Atlantic Forests. Sorry about this. Our West Atlantic Forests slideshow. And shoot, I was hoping to avoid having to do this, but I'm going to scroll. And in the second part of this, we are looking at the Mende people who live in both Sierra Leone and Liberia. And if you will recall from our previous slideshow, this is the only place in all of Africa where women perform the masks, and it relates to female circumcision, unfortunately, which is why I've got that as part of our discussion group. I don't know how many of you have picked up on that yet for this week. And that female circumcision is very tied into a lot of traditions throughout the countries of Africa. In Nigeria, it has been abolished, which is a really great thing. I hope the rest of the continent will follow that example. So today I'm going to talk about some of these traditions, more about the mask-making traditions in particular, but I felt that I could not really talk about the mask-making traditions and the masquerades without also mentioning that female genital mutilation is also tied to some of these traditions. So without further ado, I'm going to start with the Mende, who, as I said, live in Sierra Leone. And here is a map of Sierra Leone showing you where the different ethnic groups live in this region. The Temne are also somewhat related to the Mende, although they are not friendly with one another, but a lot of their practices are similar. So in any case, the Mende migrated from the Sudan to the north, and oral traditions tell that there was a peaceful migration into the area that might have spanned the period from 200 to 1500 AD. So that's a very long period of time. And during that time, as people are immigrating from one area to another, they're meeting other people, intermarrying with other people, and picking up people along the way that come with them. So immigrants into this region probably originated from more than one source. And artistic traditions link them closely to the coastal Bolam peoples, which most likely resulted from the Mende borrowing ideas they found to be useful in their own society. So this Mende mask that we see here, actually, we see in several other places used for different purposes. So sometimes it gets kind of confusing trying to study this region because different areas adopt similar things, but they have different meanings for different peoples. And as we see with the Senufo group, the Mende also have two main educational societies, and their names are very similar. It's Poro for the men and Sande for the women. However, I will say in some regions, depending on where you go, for the women it might be Bundu or Bandu. And they're open to anyone in the community of the appropriate gender, and they've earned the misnomer secret societies because their actions are hidden from the eyes of people who are uninitiated children, members of the opposite sex, and outsiders to the community. So everyone who is a part of that society knows what the existence and purpose of the societies are, and as we've seen elsewhere, the primary role of both is to teach people about what the expectations of them are for the community, and it also is meant to institute a sense of community morals and also to be an efficient means of social control. So one of the things that you see here, this is the Sawe mask, which I'm going to talk about in much more detail, but this is the mask that is worn by the Sande or Bundu Women's Society. So they, like a lot of other West African countries, tribes, also have their supreme creator of the universe, who is Ngewo. And as we see in other regions, this creator is assisted by ancestors and other spirits known as Ngfa, and they are both appealed to for protection and for the fertility of the community and individuals belonging to the community. And all manifestations of the spirit, including the masks that are performed for religious ceremonies, are considered Gafa. So the masks are carved to be aesthetically pleasing to the spirits. In other words, they need to be beautiful so that the spirits will come in and inhabit them. So here you see a woman actually wearing the Bandu or Sande helmet mask with surrounded by some other women. And it's hoped that through its continual use of the mask, the spirits will embody the dancer during the ceremony. So this helmet mask, so called because it fits completely over the head like a helmet, is associated with the Sande Society or the Bonde Society, and is found throughout Sierra Leone and Western Liberia among a number of ethnic groups. And as I said, it's the only masking tradition in Africa exclusively worn by women. And throughout Africa, we see women that act as intermediaries between the spirit world and the earthly world. We have societies that are matrilineal, but aside from all that, there are no other known examples of women using masks. And I'll tell you right now, this will be a question on a test, so make note of it. I'm amazed how many people miss that. So which tribe is the only tribe that allows women to use masks? The Mende. So again, looking at Sande, Bondo, and Poro. So they are pan-ethnic associations, and what that means is if you're a member of the Mende ethnicity, then you belong to one of these organizations. So the descriptions of these organizations are based on extensive research that lots of ethnographers and anthropologists have done, and these were conducted prior to the civil wars that disrupted a lot of these communities in the 1990s. It was a very huge tragic period, and many people died, and so they're trying to recover from the horrors of these civil wars. And so some of these institutions are being revived, some of the traditions are being revived because they helped to form a foundation for civil society in the past. So the Sande or Bondo Society. So we find this amongst West Atlantic speaking peoples, including the Gola and the Temne, Mande-speaking peoples, which includes the Mende, the Vai, and the Capelli, and the Bassa. So Sande or Bondo officials will take female children into a shelter, and there they will learn the secrets of womanhood and undergo a clitoridectomy, or as some people call it, female genital mutilation. And when the initiates have completed their training, they're then presented to the community as fully mature women. And I hope that you will watch the YouTube videos that I posted about the Sande mask, and also about this particular tradition of the clitoridectomy, so that you'll kind of get a full look at what's going on and be able to argue, tradition versus the way we look at things now, and why, things might be bad, things might be good. One of the things I will tell you is it's been remarkably hard to abolish it because it is so ingrained into West African and African culture. Initiation in particular, it became tied to initiation, and in African societies, if you are not initiated, you're not considered to be fully human or marriageable, or even, accepted within the society. So this makes it, extremely hard to eradicate as a tradition. So in all of these groups, the carved headdresses are danced by the leaders of the women's associations in order to manifest the spirits that guide them. And a masked spirit is seen as an embodiment of mystical power, which some people call medicine, of Sande or Bondo. And each masquerader will have their own individual name and identity, but generic terms can also be used, including the Sande leader or the expert leader who dances. And if you look at the one YouTube video, you'll see that the British Museum, it wasn't the British Museum, but it was a British museum, had a Sande mask, and a group of Mende women came in and actually named the mask and then regifted it to the museum. So it's an interesting thing to watch. So this is a photograph that was taken during a Bondo ceremony of the Temne people, and an important masquerader here known as Nawo is surrounded by her attendants, and every aspect of the masquerade is linked to the character of the spirit, and also to the roles and the values of the Bondo Association. They're basically teaching young women how to comport themselves in a moral and ethical sort of way. And you'll see at the very top of the mask, there's a projection with a white scarf tied to it, and that shows the mask's solidarity with the initiates, who will be covered in a white pigment during their initiation to show that they are in between. Liminal means in between, so this shows their liminal otherworldly status. Right now they are neither girls nor women. They're in an in-between space. So looking at some of the imagery and what it means on the mask itself, you see there are concentric bands at the center, and there's several different interpretations of that, one of which is it represents the ridges that surround the black chrysalis of a particular species of moth. And the Nawo is responsible for the transformation of these young women into fully feminine, sexually mature women, so it's supposed to show the equivalent of a chrysalis that protects the metamorphosis of a winged creature. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is that it represents the Sande spirit Sawe, and she is a river spirit, and when she emerges from the spirit, she has concentric rings of water, the ripples that appear on the surface of the water. So that's another interpretation of the rings at the base of the mask. And there's some people who believe that the rings of the mask represent the double chins of a large woman who is appreciated more in West African society, but some people say that that is not true, but I'm just putting that out there as one possible interpretation. And then other features talk about the creation of the mask. The Sande official falls unkempt into the water, but then emerges with beautiful clothing and elaborately braided hair. So here you can see a woman with a traditional Mende hairstyle, and if we go back, you can see how it's sort of similar to what you see on the Bonde or Sande mask, and that's supposed to show, you know, the beauty of a typical Mende woman. And so the girls who come to their communities at the end of their initiations will be wearing these hairstyles, which are supposed to be symbols of orderly and symbolized life. And here it also emphasizes the links between high status and elegant grooming. This particular one is wearing a version of a European crown. And also the surface of the mask is always a very beautiful, very glossy, shiny black, and that's supposed to represent not just the color of the mud on the river bottom, but also to symbolize the clean, oiled, healthy, and beautiful skin of the young initiates. And this is actually an image just to kind of, again, show that this is a part of it, of two girls who are in the initiation hut after their clitoridectomies. So one of the things we also see in the mask, her eyes are almost shut. She's supposed to look as though she is very calm and that she has wisdom, beauty, grace, and self-control. And the young girls who emerge as women will need these qualities within the multi-generational polygamous households of their future husbands. And then another type of mask, of the same mask, emerges in clowns that come who accompany the more beautiful masks, and frequently the clown will wear an ugly or disfigured version of an older mask, and it dances in a very uncouth, clumsy manner, and this is supposed to show the young girls how they are not supposed to behave. It's supposed to show a woman who has been dishonored because of bad behavior. And we also have small sculpted versions of the head of the Bondo or Sande mask appearing on staves and other objects that are used by the association, and that's meant to remind people of the spiritual source of the women's authority. And then there might also be freestanding figures that are stored with the masks and other materials that will act as a group's spiritual power or medicine in the group's shrine. So, coming from the Women's Society, we now look at the Men's Society, the Poro Society. And yes, the men also undergo circumcision. However, they're much older than the girls that receive it. It's quite a different process. And, with the women, female circumcision can make giving birth very difficult. It does all kinds of negative things for the woman. So, it's a very different sort of thing. But in any case, getting back to the Poro Society, Sunday associations alternate their training sessions with those of the men's association known as Poro. And during the period that's set aside for Poro, there may be a Sawe mask that will appear for the funeral of an important Sunday official, or maybe if someone breaks the laws of the association and they have to be judged and punished. And Poro masquerades are only performed during Sunday training periods when the same conditions apply. So, as I said, Poro circumcises young boys and initiates them into adulthood and also prepares them for sexual maturity and married life. And Poro people of the Gola people might bring out a Gebetu masquerader who dances with a beautifully carved helmet mask. But Poro leaders in Sierra Leone and Liberia don't often wear wooden masks, and in some cases they don't even wear costumes. Instead, there's something known as the Great Thing of Poro, which is meant to be an invisible spirit, and that is made known through its voice alone. But there are other Poro groups amongst the Mende people who own powerful masquerades, such as Gaboy and Gabini above, and both manifest the spirit of Poro and, again, emphasize the role Poro has in supporting political and social authority. And if you want, you can click on the link and see a Gaboy mask dancing on YouTube. And unlike the masquerades of Sande, neither incorporate a wooden mask. So let's go back to that picture and you can see what it looks like when it's not being worn. And then here it is being worn by a dancer. So instead, these masks are made of leather, fabric, layers of natural rather than blackened raffia fiber, also cowrie shells, leather, leopard, monkey skin, mirrors, and wooden tablets that have Quranic and verses on them might be attached to the cylindrical headdress and the tiers of the fiber. And as you can kind of see on the dancer here, they all swing out into the space as the dancer spins, or they might shake with his dance steps. And then in the northern portion of the territory that's controlled by Poro, Sande masquerades are actually quite rare. But Poro associations of the Gabandi, the Capelli, the Kissi, and the Toma peoples, instead of the great thing of Poro to be invisible, they instead have a frightful masquerade for it called Landai. And this mask being has as you can see in this slide, a very heavy wooden headdress with a great beaked nose, open jaws, which you can't see in this particular slide, jagged teeth, and a full crown of feathers, and the eyes stare upwards. And Landai's general shape recalls the Banda masquerade of the Nalu and the Baga, if you remember from our previous slideshow, but instead here it's meant to be terrifying. And the voluminous raffia fiber costume is white, but the mask itself is black with a bloody red mouth. And here you can kind of see it without all of the raffia around it. And it said that the spirit eats the boys alive before they're spit out as adult men. So then the scarification that the boys receive are supposed to be marks of his teeth. And Landai gives this concept of physical presence because he'll have cola nut juice that'll drip from his mouth after, quote unquote, consuming a youth. And while both Gibini and Landai are non-human forms, Landai belongs much more emphatically to the fearsome world of the forest, and it reflects the influence of people who live to the east, where masquerades make manifest a variety of supernatural forest beings. Here on this one you can see the teeth a bit more. And Poro masquerades are not always frightening. In a lot of Kono and Mono communities of northeastern Liberia and southernmost Guinea, the guardian of Poro instead is a very beautiful female masquerade who appears to boys when they enter the Poro enclosure, and she acts the role of bringing them food and supplies, and then while they're in seclusion, she brings news to their families. And although this is a female spirit, it is animated by a man, and then it's also owned by the only woman who is a female elder, and she's the only female allowed within the initiation center. And one of these female masquerades appeared in a Kono community, which you can see in this slide, and this was probably because the photographer commissioned a group of mask dances. So the mask itself, as you can see here, is polished a shiny black and has very subtly modeled eyebrows and cheekbones. And the rounded forehead at the top of the mask and the slightly uplifted chin on the bottom half of the mask form two tilted planes that intersect at the eyes. And then the eyes themselves are painted white, possibly as a reference to the far-sighted gaze of Poro, and the pursed lips seem to be drawn in a silent whistle. And this guy here, he's holding kind of a broom, and we'll see this with a lot of masquerades where there'll be a guardian next to the masquerader to kind of drive people away from the masquerader. And there is a powerful masculine masquerade known as Go, which might visit Liberian youths who are being initiated into Poro. And in some areas, the masqueraders are members of the Go Association or the Leopard Society. And it's a closed association that has members from several different ethnic groups. And elsewhere, it's simply a respectful title for a particularly powerful masquerade. And these masks exaggerate the features of the female Poro spirit. They have soft cheekbones that become sharp triangles, small noses that spread outward and upward, closed oval eyes might become tubular protrusions, and then the delicate chin and lips are transformed into wide muzzles. And then another type of mask is known as a Goge, or a ruling spirit or a lord of Go. And this particular mask was actually carved in the middle of the 19th century for a Mono judge and lawgiver. The Mono are closely related to the Dan and the U, which is spelled W-E, by the way. So in any case, this particular mask, we know the history of. It was consecrated with human sacrifice, which they no longer do, just so you know, but it was consecrated with human sacrifice and then smeared with the blood of executed criminals. And the teeth might actually have been teeth that belonged to one of the dead men. And it was once owned by a Mono blacksmith named Gabana, who had inherited it from his grandfather. And basically this mask was meant to solve disputes or urgent problems, and the mask would be brought out, wrapped in black cloth, and at the appropriate hour, Gabana, the blacksmith, would unwrap it, lay it before him on a mat, and ask it to support the decisions of the elders. And he alone would be able to petition the mask and to interpret its response. And this particular Mono mask is kind of similar to, in some ways, the Great Thing of Poro. It also would have been a mask that would bring supplies and medicines into the boys undergoing initiation as well. This horn here actually has medicines inside it, and these little packets at the top also have medicines inside of it. So only a few Mono masquerades have the status that a Goge would have. And in spite of that, all of them are kept together in a shelter within a sacred enclosure near the community's meeting place. And then they're brought out in the manner of the Goge to bolster the authority of the leaders. And some of the masquerades judge disputes between families or individuals. They might collect debts or supervise the distribution of food at funerals and other feasts. And one of the most important monomasquerades takes the form of the hornbill, which is a bird. I don't know if we've discussed this bird before. It's a fairly common bird in West Africa. So you can see the top portion of it looks very much like a face, like some of the masks we've seen already. But then the nose and the mouth form a beak, a very beautiful beak, in this particular case carved with striations and lines. And then striations along the beak might also represent teeth. And the hornbill is considered to be an ungainly bird. However, the mask is a very beautiful, elegant composition. And as I said, it has a lot of the features like the oval eyes and the smooth brows that we see in the feminine masks. And then at the top, you can see there's kind of an incrustation up here where they would have poured out libations of some sort, maybe expectorated kola nuts, types of liquor, maybe goat's blood, different types of things, but that is on top of the head, so it would have been given offerings. And then there's also a protective grid of Arabic verse written in ink on the mask's interior, and that reminds us that it's considered to have supernatural power. And so now we're going to look at the Dan and their neighbors. I mentioned them briefly a little bit ago. And this is actually at the bottom of this slide. This is a Dan hornbill mask. And so hornbill masquerades are also popular amongst the Dan, who are related to the Mono, as I said, and they speak a related Mono language. But in this particular case, they're not revered as sacred messengers or obeyed as police officers. Instead, they're meant to be the joyous companions of women and appear at festive gatherings. And in fact, forest spirits are believed by the Dan to inspire a wide variety of masquerades, including those that are merely meant to entertain the community. And according to the Dan, forest spirits select a human partner when they want to participate in the human world. And so the dancer would maybe have a vision or something like that, and then would have revealed to him or her which mask, costumes, and dance styles will allow the spirits to materialize. And while the masquerades bestow fame on the human associates of the supernatural beings, there's an old and powerful masked spirit that might give a human leader the power to regulate human conduct and to also punish evildoers. So except in northern areas, Dan groups don't participate in Poro, and their feminine masqueraders are generally considered to be minor spirits. And generally these are smooth, oval, feminine masks that are usually worn by young men. And the spirits of these masks then allow the men to perform as singers, poets, gymnasts, or dancers. And the female masquerades might be sponsored by wealthy individuals or by the masqueraders' friends, both to please the supernatural forces and to enhance the prestige of their patrons. And a few female masquerades might take on a supervisory role in a Dan community. For example, round-eyed masks like this one here with bright red surfaces are worn to chastise women who've lit illegal fires during the dry season. And then there's another type of feminine round-eyed mask with a smooth dark face. It's a running mask known as gonyage. And the youth who wears the mask would have won a series of races showing that he is worthy of embodying the masquerade, and then he'll further celebrate his victory with its blessing. And in the past, a gonyage such as this would allow the champion runner to lead raids on enemy camps because it was thought to have to give supernatural powers for speed and protection upon the wearer. And then similar abilities are needed by the youth who animates the Kagla mask, which is danced with an angular mask seen as masculine. And Kagla appears at the performances of the more serious masked beings and actually steals the possessions of onlookers with his hooked stick. And so if you are in attendance at one of these, you need to keep your sense of humor and have some extra money along to ransom your belongings. So every plane of this trickster mask is a geometric form like triangles that you can see here, and even the eyes themselves are empty triangles. Excuse me. And minor masquerades, such as a female singing mask here, become more important as the person who wears it or owns it gains stature in a Dan community and becomes more deeply involved with masquerade spirits. And in time, an entertaining masquerade might become a go-gay. So in other words, a masquerade that previously was minor, was previously just simply meant to entertain, becomes more important. And so the mask has to be modified and a new costume has to be acquired to show the higher rank. And warrior masquerades, identified by their tubular eyes and a crest of feathers, might be particularly suited for such transformations. And here's a very different mask than the beautiful sort of oval faces that we've been looking at. Warrior masquerades may have originated to the south of the Dan along the coasts of Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire, amongst populations who speak languages of the Kru family and who did not identify themselves as distinct ethnic groups until the colonial era. And warriors of the people that are known as the Grebo were once greeted by the masquerader after successful raids, and similar military masquerades inspired them to fight. And military masks that are taken from Grebo communities and other Kru-speaking areas are brightly painted, unlike this one here, and display facial features, which we do have here that are attached onto, rather than carved, onto this long plank-like face. And European artists were entranced by the reversals of these positive and negative forms on the bold, arresting objects. So in this slide here, it's a uniform grayish brown rather than the usual bright colors that we would see. And it also, these tubular bits are meant to show extra sets of eyes because otherworldly creatures might have something like that. And then between these coastal peoples and the Dan live the Kru-speaking Yu peoples. As I said, it's spelled W-E, it's pronounced U. And they're also known as the Guri, the Kran, and the Wobe. And like the Dan, they also have a wide variety of masquerades, and they also have important regulatory positions within their small egalitarian communities. And in the words of a scholar who is herself Yu, the masquerade is a spirit which God has given to men to organize and discipline them. The sacred masquerade is thus the stabilizing element of society. And Yu groups also rank masquerades according to their masks, costumes, and performance styles. So singers are usually highly decorated versions of the Dan feminine masquerades, as you can see here. And the dancer and warrior masks have tubular eyes, broad triangular noses with prominent nostrils, as you can see here, and then arched tusks at they're kind of to the side here, but they're at each side of the face, and then an enormous curved forehead. And after several generations, as among the Dan, one of these masked spirits might then be elevated into a more powerful being. So eagle feathers and the hair of a sacrificed ram on the mask's headdress announce that the mask is now able to resolve disputes or locate evildoers. And then added layers of leaves or palm fibers for the skirts, additional panels of leather and fur, and maybe a fringe of brass bells or cartridges will indicate that the mask has become the assistant or the bard of a great mask or a greater spirit. So the Jigla, the great masquerade, is shrouded with white, and white is the color of bones, and also the ancestors who first knew and served the masked spirit. And the original bright colors are then whitened, and the projecting tusks, horns, and eyes are hidden in the mass of these huge protective and medicinal materials that are placed on the mask. And then raffia forms an enormous base for Jigla, and it appears to roll or float above the ground. And it will only appear during times of great need, and no one is allowed to sit or cough or chat casually in the presence of this power. And it also, as you can see, it's holding a spear, and it holds it and could at one time have been thrown between two opposing armies, causing them to cease fighting. So now we're going to look at some of the women's arts amongst the Dan and the Yu. You women will often accompany masked dancers, and they may even perform as masqueraders. They don't wear masks, but they're masqueraders, and they do that by painting designs on their faces and dressing in a full raffia fiber costume, and then a headdress of cowrie shells and fur. And they're able to bring a wonderful spiritual presence to the community, and they're given honorary titles, but they never join the rank of the great masquerade, the Jigla. Men say that women cannot host the most powerful spirits because female masqueraders are too recognizable behind their face paint, and so the men who lend their bodies to the important masked beings need complete anonymity. And like the girls of Sande and Bondo, Ewe and Dan girls will wear white pigment for their initiation into womanhood. Yet the faces and upper torsos of the Ewe and Dan girls are painted in particularly striking ways. Some groups might cover the girls' faces in diverse colors, or sometimes even glittering white designs in crushed shell and chalk. And then talented artists would paint their faces and torsos each in a slightly different way to complement that girl's individual features. And the gleaming white patterns of Ewe female initiates might also be related to the use of white in Ewe masquerades. For the clitoridectomy is a dangerous operation that brings them close to death and the ancestors. And again, white is the color of bones and the ancestral world. It's also a symbol of purity and spiritual power, which are believed to result from the operation. And the important role that these girls will play in the future as mothers and providers is emphasized by the chairs they carry, which you can see here. So kind of similar to the stools of the Ashanti, which we'll see in our next segment next week. So in any case, these curved seats might belong to a grandfather or uncle, and they're usually used only by elders. But during this period in their lives, the girls are honored as the sources of a family's wealth and continued survival. And women also have an important role in preparing a community for the arrival of masked spirits. When a Ewe or Dan family invites a masquerade to appear in a community, the leaders have to provide some kind of food for the feast that comes. So women of the lineage will cook the rice stored in their own granaries. They'll prepare the sauce, and female farming abilities, organizational talents, and culinary skills are necessary if the spiritual beings of the masquerade are to be properly welcomed and celebrated. And then when a woman has been selected as the main hostess for such a feat, she's then acknowledged as the most hospitable woman of her lineage. And then she will parade through town with her female friends and family, carrying a large serving spoon, which actually this woman is moving too fast for you to actually see it, but that shows her status. And then an assistant who walks behind her carries the vessel that will contain the most important serving of rice in the feast. So this is one of those serving spoons. It's a rice spoon, and in this particular case, it's the equivalent of a wooden mask. So the woman who wants to be the main hostess of her lineage might see the spirit belonging to the spoon in a dream, just as a man might dream of the masked being that he wants to offer his services to as a masquerader. And then once the custodian or owner of the spoon or mask dies, or is no longer able to handle the responsibilities that are connected with its care, the responsibilities will go on to a successor that the spirit will choose. And artists throughout eastern Liberia and western Cote d'Ivoire have also created freestanding figures of important women in wood, and also cast jewelry and images for them in brass. And the most important famous woodcarver of the Dan or Ewe region may be Zlan of Belawali, who worked for clients in several ethnic areas during the middle of the 20th century. And the female figures that he carved for his wealthy patrons were often idealized portraits of the wife of the person who was commissioning the work. They were considered to be prestige items, and Dan owners would charge fees to visitors who wanted to see them. And although these portraits were carved primarily for the pleasure of their owners, they share the styles of the masks and the spoons. They're considered to be sacred objects that house supernatural beings. And they have shiny dark surfaces, and this one has ornamental designs, bands of ornamental designs at her arms, her legs, her neck, on her breasts, on her waist. And all of these are basically showing the aesthetics of the region, the artistic inventiveness of the region. And we also see these in the art of the Guro, or another Mande group who lived to the east of the Dan and central coast Cote d'Ivoire. So we'll look at the Guro now. And Guro families of high social standing might have relationships with a particular sacred triad of forest creatures that appear as their masquerades. So the first of these is Zamble, who has a sleek and shiny mask, and that is said to have the horns of the antelope and the powerful jaws of a leopard. And the sweeping curves that flow from the tips of the horns along the high forehead to the narrow muzzle are very typical of the Guro face masks. And the costume worn by the athletic young dancer joins a scarf made of expensive and attractive cloth with a cloak that's formed of the hide of a wild beast. So they're basically showing us the juxtaposition of wild and civilized forces. And then also wearing a green and fragrant skirt of palm fiber and thick fiber ruffs at his wrists, and ankles vibrate as he dances. And then he would also have bells. You can sort of see them a little bit in this slide, that would provide a counterpoint to the beats of the drums that accompany the masquerade. And then Zamble is usually followed by his wife and consort Gu. And her mask, worn of course by a male dancer, is a simple oval female face that is crowned with horns or an elaborate hairstyle. And today it would often be painted brightly in red or yellow, as you see here. And Gu dances gently and elegantly, and she has rattles around her ankles, which are the equivalent of Zamble's bells, and the animal skin on her back is typically that of an antelope rather than a leopard. And then the uncouth and uninhibited Zauli is the antithesis of both Zamble and Gu. And he's often identified as the brother of Zamble. And he has bulging cheeks and very prominent horns and protruding eyes. And his behavior is unpredictable. He might interrupt his dance to tease or whip female spectators. And his costume is a much cheaper, unkempt version of the one that's worn by Zamble. So these three Guro masquerades are all sacred beings. They all have altars at which people make sacrifices when people are calling on them for assistance. But they also are meant to delight a family's guests at a funeral or at feasts and bring prestige to the leader of a lineage. And in addition to these forest spirits, there are other types of masquerades that might come forth in Guro communities. Some are danced primarily for entertainment, even though they might be sponsored by families or groups negotiating for higher social position. So this is a Flali masquerade from the 1970s, which was the result of a collaboration between the performers themselves and a sculptor named Sao Diboti. So the mask of the Guro entertainment is painted in a very bright color. It's that of a beautiful young woman. But the figure, there's a little tiny figure on top of the mask, and that represents one of the musicians playing on the right edge of the photograph here. And there's other Guro masquerades that are even more sacred and mysterious than Zamble, Zauli, and Gu. And in northern Guro areas, there's a highly revered being called Gi, who wears a heavy horned horizontal helmet mask that has the horns of the forest buffalo and wide gaping jaws. And here you can, well, there's the horns. You can kind of, everything else is kind of covered up there. Here you can see them in the background. So sacred masquerades in the southern Guro regions are known as Jay, and they bring forth a host of human-like and animal-like beings. And the zoomorphic mask, which basically means animal-like, identifies a spirit being linked to a single wild beast like an elephant, a hippopotamus, an antelope, and then masqueraders would dance in the manner appropriate to the animal that they resemble. And then anthropomorphic masquerades lead the J group, and they appear in voluminous skirts of dried raffia. And both Gi and Jay are strictly limited to male participants and performers. And according to the widespread legends that concern the origins of the spirits of these masquerades, the spirits were once snubbed by women, so that's why they are excluded. So as a result, the Guru believe any contact with the masquerades is harmful for both women and children. Yet the power of the greatest Jay mask in human form is based upon ceremonies conducted by old women, and they often carry this mother of masks to the site of where girls are receiving their circumcision, and then they let the blood and tiny bits of tissue from the operation fall on its face to empower it. And then after that, the mask goes back to the shrine and to the men of the Jay Association. So that concludes this chapter. That went by a little bit faster than I thought, but that's quite all right. So later today, I'm going to be posting a quiz for this. So that will go up on D2L, and I will try to put links to everything under week 2 so that everything will be easy for you to find. And as always, if you have any questions or any problems with anything, please shoot me an email or a text.